In the middle of the wedding, the bride's daughter suddenly shouted and demanded that the ceremony be stopped. When everyone found out the reason why the little girl did it, they were all shocked. Before we dive into today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. Your support helps us bring more amazing stories your way. Thank you. You sure you're ready for this, Ariana? Michael Smith's voice lingered in Ariana's mind, a low whisper that refused to vanish. It hung there, a ghost beneath her carefully controlled thoughts, creeping in like an unwanted shadow. But she shook it away, annoyed. Michael had always been protective, cautious to a fault, seeing phantoms even when there were none. Gene Hackman had been nothing but charming from the moment they met, his smile easy, his eyes a crystal-clear blue, the kind that put people instantly at ease. Tall and polished, he moved through rooms effortlessly, greeting people with a warm handshake, his voice calm and reassuring. On the surface, there was nothing to doubt, nothing to question. Yet something restless tugged at Ariana's heart, a faint whisper she stubbornly refused to acknowledge. Sophia's voice, small and earnest, echoed within her. "Mama, are you happy?" Those simple words had held too much weight for a child of only 8. Sophia had always been sensitive, wise beyond her years, carrying the quiet burden of someone who had known loss too early, too deeply. Ariana swallowed hard, her throat tightening. Her daughter's large eyes had been pleading, searching her face as if she could read some invisible script there, waiting for a truth Ariana herself hadn't fully recognized. She tried to push away her daughter's voice, replacing it with the hopeful murmurs drifting from outside her door, the gentle laughter of arriving guests, the quiet music that danced on the morning air. It was her day, their day, a day earned through struggle and heartache, years of loneliness that had finally, mercifully ended. She had survived grief once, survived tragedy. She deserved happiness, didn't she? Ariana turned, glimpsing herself briefly in the mirror. The silk gown hugged her form, the soft lace cascading in gentle waves along her curves. It was perfect. She forced a breath, straightening her spine. This was the moment she'd worked so hard for. Proof she'd finally conquered life's relentless obstacles. Yet her reflection, poised and elegant as it was, couldn't hide the storm brewing deep inside, a whisper of something uncertain. From down the hall, a muted conversation caught Ariana's attention. She moved instinctively toward the sound, bare feet quiet on the carpeted hallway. The door to Gene's study stood slightly ajar, and his voice, usually smooth and warm, was low and tense. Ariana hesitated outside, her pulse quickening without knowing why. "She'll sign without a second thought," Gene murmured, the words strangely flat, emotionless. "Trust me, there's no way she'll see this coming." Ariana's heart skipped, the pulse roaring loud in her ears. She pushed the door open slowly, holding her breath, praying she'd misheard, misunderstanding something innocent, harmless. But Gene simply smiled, turning toward her without a trace of the coldness she'd just heard. "Darling," he said easily, blue eyes shimmering warmly. "You look breathtaking." Her voice trembled despite herself, betraying her confusion. "Who were you talking to just now?" His smile widened slightly, carefully, calculated. "Oh, just finalizing a few details. Business doesn't stop just because we're getting married, right?" He stepped forward, taking her hand gently, his fingers cool against her heated skin. "Now, stop worrying and go finish getting ready. This is our day." Ariana searched his face desperately, wanting to see truth there, wanting nothing more than to erase Sophia's fears, Michael's warnings, and her own sudden unease. But Gene's expression was carefully neutral, unreadable, polished by years of practice. She let herself nod slowly, stepping back out of the room. Her chest felt hollow, a dull ache spreading slowly through her veins. "Mama?" Sophia stood in the hallway, her lavender dress brushing gently against her knees. Ariana knelt down, cupping her daughter's face tenderly, tracing a gentle thumb over her cheek. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she whispered, forcing a smile. "Everything's fine." But Sophia's eyes were wide, seeing far more than Ariana intended to reveal. Her small voice shook, but there was steel beneath the surface, strength Ariana had seen before in this child of hers. "He's not good, Mama," she whispered. "Please believe me. I feel it in my heart." Ariana swallowed, a painful lump rising in her throat. Sophia had always possessed something Ariana could never fully explain: an instinct, an intuition, a gift. Her daughter was never wrong. Never. But today, the price of listening to her child's fears seemed far too high. She kissed Sophia's forehead softly, brushing away her own doubts along with her daughter's quiet tears. "It's just nerves," she whispered, more to herself than Sophia. "Everything will be all right." Yet even as the words fell from her lips, Ariana felt the lie, heavy and cold. Sophia didn't speak again. Instead, she turned slowly away, leaving Ariana alone in the hallway, her heart twisting painfully in her chest. Michael's gentle warning echoed again, clear as crystal in her memory. "Be careful, Ariana. Things aren't always what they seem." She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic rhythm beneath her palm. The distant voices outside were happy, carefree, blissfully unaware of the darkness she suddenly felt growing. Ariana took a shaky breath, forcing her trembling hands to steady. The evening before the wedding unfolded exactly as Ariana had dreamed it. A glittering swirl of laughter, soft music, and candlelight. Jean stood at the center of it all, effortlessly holding court, a man in perfect command of every room he entered. His jokes drew warm laughter from the guests, who hung on to his every charming word. Ariana watched from afar, her heart swelled with pride. How could someone be so right? So effortlessly perfect? Across the room, hidden partly behind a tall flower arrangement, Sophia stood motionless, her lavender dress gently fluttering from the draft of the open windows. Her small fingers nervously twisted the hem of her skirt, her eyes wide and watchful, following Jean's every move. There was something about him, something the grown-ups couldn't see, something that made her skin prickle and her stomach tighten. She didn't know why she felt it, only that it was real. From his spot among the crowd, Jean's laughter rang out again, easy and warm. He was telling a story now, one of his favorites, filled with humor and charm. The guests leaned forward, smiles widening as Jean's voice dipped and rose theatrically, weaving his tale masterfully. They adored him. They believed him. Then, without warning, his eyes shifted, meeting Sophia's across the room. His gaze lingered for a heartbeat, and in that brief instant, everything warm and pleasant vanished from his face. His eyes turned cold, unfeeling, like two chips of ice slicing right through her. Sophia's breath caught sharply in her chest, her fingers tightening their grip on the fabric of her dress. She felt suddenly small, frightened beneath that brief, cruel stare. It wasn't a look meant for a child. It was calculating, almost threatening. It said clearly, without words, "I see you. I know what you're doing." Just as quickly, Jean's mask returned, slipping back into place as if it had never left. He continued his story, laughter once again filling the room. Sophia trembled, unable to tear her gaze away. Her tiny heart hammered fiercely against her ribs, whispering a warning she couldn't ignore. Later, as darkness deepened around the sprawling estate, Sophia quietly slipped away from the noisy laughter of the party, padding softly down the hallway toward Jean's private study. The door was slightly open, revealing a thin sliver of pale light spilling out into the corridor. She hesitated, heart beating wildly in her throat. She knew she shouldn't be here. She knew if her mother caught her, she'd be in trouble. But the echo of Jean's icy stare pushed her forward. She needed answers. She needed something to prove what she felt deep inside, that Jean was not who he pretended to be. Holding her breath, Sophia crept closer, pressing herself flat against the wall beside the door. She heard Jean's voice clearly, no longer gentle or humorous, but sharp and cold. "She'll sign right after the ceremony," Jean said, his words clipped and precise, almost clinical. "She trusts me completely. Won't even think twice." Another voice crackled quietly through the speakerphone, muffled and distant. "And the kid? Think she'll cause trouble?" Jean laughed dryly, and Sophia felt a chill crawl slowly up her spine. It wasn't the warm laugh she'd heard earlier. This one was hollow, mean. "The kid's just noise. Ariana thinks it's nerves, grief over losing her daddy." Jean's voice dropped, sounding amused. "No one listens to children, least of all her." Sophia's fingers dug into her palms, fear coursing through her veins. She stepped back, her small legs unsteady beneath her. She had to tell her mother. Ariana would listen now. She had to. "Mama!" Ariana turned slowly, a faint smile touching her lips as she watched her daughter hurry across the terrace. "Sophia, honey, it's late. You should be in bed." Sophia's breath hitched, eyes wide with fear. "Mama, please, you have to listen. Jean's lying. He's not who you think." Ariana sighed deeply, patience thinly held. "Sophia, sweetheart, we've been through this. I understand you're scared. It's normal, with everything changing." "No!" Sophia's voice rose sharply, her small frame trembling. "I heard him, Mama. He was talking about you, about making you sign something tomorrow. He said nobody believes me because I'm a kid. But I heard it, I swear." Ariana's jaw tightened, the last thread of her patience fraying. "Sophia, enough. You need to stop this right now. Jean cares about us. He wants us to be happy. Why can't you see that?" Sophia flinched, her eyes filling with tears. She tried once more, desperation breaking through clearly in her voice. "You're making a mistake, Mama. I know what I heard. He doesn't love you. He's pretending." Ariana's chest burned, a sudden anger lashing out to cover her fear. "That's cruel, Sophia," she snapped harshly. "Do you have any idea how hard this is? How much I need this to work?" Sophia's small face crumbled, tears spilling silently onto her cheeks. Her voice trembled softly, almost inaudible. "You're choosing him over me." Ariana's heart twisted painfully, regret flickering briefly in her eyes. But pride and hurt hardened her voice. "That's not fair, Sophia. You're confused. This is just nerves, jealousy, fear. You don't know what you're saying." Sophia didn't reply. She just stared, her eyes shining with hurt and betrayal. Ariana sighed deeply, the heavy weight of guilt settling in her chest. "Go to bed, Sophia. Please." Sophia turned slowly away, shoulders slumped in defeat. Ariana watched her daughter's small figure disappear down the hall, her heart aching sharply. She wanted desperately to chase after her, pull her close, erase the pain she'd just caused. But pride and exhaustion held her still. Turning away, Ariana closed her eyes, pressing a trembling hand against her temple. Tomorrow would fix everything. Tomorrow, this foolish fear would vanish, and they'd finally be happy. The morning arrived, wrapped gently in warmth and sunlight, just as Ariana had envisioned countless times. It was perfect. Everything was exactly as she'd planned. The delicate fragrance of lilies drifting through open windows, the hum of soft music rising from the garden, the steady murmur of guests taking their seats. Yet, standing alone before the antique mirror in her bedroom, Ariana felt a strange unease, something hidden deep beneath layers of careful optimism. Her silk gown flowed effortlessly over her figure, each fold lovingly tailored, each detail a quiet testament to her dreams. Yet, despite the beauty of her reflection, her eyes betrayed the quiet storm that stirred just beneath the surface. She forced herself to smile, straightening her spine in quiet defiance of her anxiety. She had waited years for this, years of loneliness, of silent nights, of whispered prayers for something to fill the void that loss had carved inside her heart. Today, at last, should erase those memories, replace pain with joy. But Sophia's face, pale and haunted, lingered in her thoughts. A quiet knock interrupted her troubled musings. Michael appeared in the doorway, dressed neatly in a dark suit, his face calm but carrying the same gentle worry she had seen yesterday. "Ariana," Michael began softly, careful not to startle her. "You know I only want what's best for you, but after everything Sophia said, maybe you should just pause for a second. Look at things one more time. That's all I'm asking." Ariana sighed deeply, frustration threading sharply through her chest. "Michael, I appreciate your concern. I do. But I've made my decision. Sophia's scared. She lost her daddy, and it's natural for her to feel this way." Michael took a slow step closer, his voice low but firm. "Maybe she's scared for a reason, Ariana. Children see things clearly, without all the baggage adults carry around. Love blinds us sometimes. I'm just asking you to open your eyes." Ariana turned abruptly, eyes flashing, defensive anger rising sharply inside her chest. "Enough, Michael. Please, just let it go. Today is my wedding day." Michael studied her quietly, his face unreadable, then gave a resigned nod. "All right, I'll back off." "But I'm here, if anything." She cut him off sharply, impatience leaking through her carefully controlled voice. "Nothing is going to happen. Thank you, Michael, but just... please." Michael hesitated, then nodded again slowly, stepping quietly back through the doorway and leaving Ariana alone once more. She exhaled sharply, pressing fingertips against her temples, trying desperately to silence the whispering doubt he had stirred again inside her. Downstairs, beneath the lush canopy of flowers and bright sunlight, Sophia stood quietly apart from the joyous crowd. Her small heart thundered painfully inside her chest, the heavy weight of fear pressing down hard. People passed her by without noticing, their laughter and gentle chatter like salt in her wounds. No one believed her. No one listened. Her mother's words still echoed sharply inside her ears, dismissive, harsh, making Sophia's throat tighten painfully. "You're confused. You're just scared." But Sophia wasn't confused, and it wasn't fear that drove her actions now. It was something far deeper, sharper, clearer, the truth, and she wouldn't let her mother walk blindly into the darkness that Jean had created. Sophia felt the eyes of the crowd shift, turning slowly toward the grand doorway at the back of the garden. Ariana appeared, stunningly beautiful, yet Sophia saw only the fragile, vulnerable woman her mother truly was beneath the careful mask she wore. Jean stood at the altar, his face beaming warmly, carefully perfected. For a brief moment he turned slightly, meeting Sophia's gaze again. The smile faltered for an instant, replaced by something hard, dangerous, cold, an unspoken warning. Sophia's small fists tightened at her sides. Her heartbeat quickened, pounding like a wild drum inside her chest. She had no proof, nothing concrete, only the words she'd overheard, only Jean's icy stare. But instinct screamed louder than reason, stronger than doubt. The gentle swell of the music began, urging Ariana forward. Sophia watched her mother take the first step, graceful and poised toward her own destruction. Her small body trembled, fear and determination colliding sharply within her chest. She had to act. Now. In a sudden surge of courage, Sophia stepped into the aisle, her tiny frame standing defiantly between her mother and Jean. She raised her voice sharply, words ringing clearly through the stunned silence of the garden. "Stop!" The silence that fell after Sophia's cry was heavier than any sound could have been, thick, suffocating, holding everyone captive. The garden, moments ago filled with music and whispered anticipation, now felt cold and hollow. Ariana stood frozen in the aisle, heart hammering violently against her ribs, the silk of her wedding dress suddenly heavy, pulling her toward the ground. "Mama, please!" Sophia's voice cracked with urgency, small fists shaking by her sides. Don't trust him. I heard it all. He's lying. Whispers rippled through the guests, shock and confusion spreading like wildfire. Ariana's cheeks burned hot with shame, embarrassment fighting fiercely against a sudden, gnawing fear deep within her chest. She wanted desperately to brush it off, to silence Sophia's claims as mere childish nonsense, but something, the desperate courage in her daughter's eyes, held her still. Jean moved swiftly to Ariana's side, his expression carefully controlled. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, voice gentle, perfectly measured for the crowd to hear clearly. "Sophia's just frightened," he said calmly, offering the gathered guests an understanding smile. "She misses her father terribly. This has been hard on her." Yet, beneath his easy charm, Ariana felt the quiet, steely strength in the grip of his fingers. His touch, usually comforting, now felt possessive, unyielding. She shivered involuntarily, a whisper of doubt creeping like frost into her heart. Michael stepped forward slowly, his expression unusually firm, eyes fixed squarely on Jean. "Ariana," he spoke clearly, calmly, "you need to listen to Sophia." "I think we all do." Gasps and murmurs spread through the guests again, tension now rising sharply in the air. Ariana glanced quickly at Jean, whose face had darkened for just an instant before quickly returning to polished composure. "Michael," Jean's voice lowered, a subtle warning coloring his words. "This really isn't the time or place for this." Michael stood unflinching, voice quiet, yet unmistakably strong. "Actually, it's exactly the right place. Ariana deserves the truth. Sophia deserves to be heard." Ariana's gaze swung slowly between her lifelong friend and the man she'd trusted completely, conflict burning deep in her chest. Sophia's desperate sobs, Jean's icy calm, Michael's quiet determination, all tangled violently within her, pulling her heart in 1,000 painful directions. Sophia stepped forward once more, her young voice rising bravely despite the trembling of her small frame. Tears ran unchecked down her cheeks as she raised her chin defiantly. "Mama, he said you'd sign everything after you married him. He said you'd trust him too much to ask questions. I heard it, I swear." The guests shifted uncomfortably. The polite smiles from earlier now entirely vanished, replaced by curiosity and suspicion. Ariana felt Jean's hand tighten subtly on her shoulder, the pressure sharp enough to send a small jolt of pain through her body. Jean stood still, the silence around him brittle, like thin ice beneath his polished shoes. The carefully crafted charm that had masked him began to crack, minute fissures forming beneath Ariana's relentless gaze. Yet he held himself steady, shoulders back, his expression carefully composed. He still wore the mask, the man wrongfully accused, bewildered, hurt. But Ariana saw clearly now how thin that mask had always been. Sophia's small body shook, sobs spilling freely as she clung desperately to Ariana's hand. Her voice rose sharply, cutting through the quiet tension of the garden. "Mama, please, look at my eyes. I've never lied to you. Not ever." Ariana's heart ached fiercely, torn between guilt for ignoring Sophia and anger at the man who stood calmly, confidently, as if nothing had changed. Her voice was low but firm, carrying clearly through the heavy silence. "Jean," she said slowly, clearly, "look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Did you make that call? Are there papers waiting for me after the wedding?" Jean's expression remained smooth, controlled. His blue eyes, usually warm and inviting, were suddenly distant, guarded. He tilted his head slightly, offering Ariana an indulgent smile, a smile she'd once adored, that now sent chills slipping down her spine. "No, Ariana," Jean replied softly, voice gentle yet flat, devoid of true emotion. "Of course not. Sophia misunderstood. She's just a child." But the ease of his denial, the smoothness, the practiced calm, felt suddenly alien, jarring against the chaos swirling inside Ariana's chest. She shivered, despite the warmth of the sunlight, a whisper of cold realization settling deep within her bones. For the first time, Ariana saw clearly past Jean's carefully rehearsed answers and flawless manners. She saw the emptiness beneath, a void where trust and love had never truly lived. Michael moved closer, his voice calm but firm, carrying authority Ariana had rarely seen from him before. He turned slowly to address the crowd, urging softly, "Look closely, everyone. This isn't childish jealousy. This isn't a tantrum. This is the truth staring us in the face." Murmurs of confusion and concern rippled quickly through the guests, tension pulling tighter like a wire stretched dangerously thin. Ariana felt a tremor building within herself, uncertainty giving way to clarity. Her fingers tightened protectively around Sophia's small hand, the courage of her daughter giving her strength she'd thought she'd lost forever. Just then, the distant sound of footsteps approaching echoed clearly through the hushed garden, heavy and deliberate. Every head turned, watching with startled curiosity as two uniformed officers walked calmly toward the altar. Their presence immediately changed the air, once charged with confusion, now heavy with something colder, darker. Jean stiffened sharply, the carefully controlled facade finally slipping. His face paled, eyes flickering with genuine panic before he quickly smoothed his expression again, forcing calm. "Officers, what's going on?" Jean asked, voice steady but edged faintly with tension. "Surely this isn't necessary." The first officer glanced briefly at Sophia, his face unreadable yet respectful. He spoke calmly, clearly. "We received a call last night. We have some questions, Mr. Hackman." Jean's carefully constructed control fractured fully now, his eyes narrowing sharply, flicking quickly toward Sophia. His voice dropped to a whisper, harsh and dangerous, meant only for Ariana's ears. "You'll regret this." But Ariana stood straighter, lifting her chin defiantly, heart pounding fiercely but voice steady. "No, Jean, I won't." Jean's lips curled, briefly exposing something cruel beneath the surface before he quickly masked it again, turning obediently toward the officers. They placed firm hands on his arms, escorting him slowly away from the gathered crowd. Every eye followed his retreat, a stunned silence following in his wake. Sophia's quiet sobs had calmed slightly, but she remained pressed closely against Ariana's side, her tiny body trembling. Ariana knelt slowly, cupping her daughter's tear-streaked face tenderly, heart filled with remorse and gratitude in equal measure. "I should have believed you sooner," Ariana whispered gently, thumb softly brushing Sophia's wet cheek. "You were so brave. You protected me." Sophia's voice trembled softly, eyes searching Ariana's carefully. "I was scared, Mama. Scared you'd marry him and it'd be too late." Ariana gathered Sophia into her arms tightly, holding her daughter close. "You saved us both," she murmured fiercely, heart swelling painfully with love and pride. "I promise you, I'll never doubt you again." The garden slowly emptied, guests drifting away in stunned silence, whispers trailing behind them like faint shadows. Crushed petals lay scattered along the aisle, their delicate beauty now lost beneath hurried footsteps. Music had long since stopped, replaced by an eerie quiet that felt heavy, unnatural. Ariana stood in the center of it all, her elegant wedding gown now wrinkled and disheveled, silk dragging against grass and dirt. Her breath came slow and uneven, a shuddering reflection of the chaos left behind. Sophia clung to her mother's side, small arms gripping Ariana tightly, as if letting go would mean losing her forever. Ariana gently brushed the soft curls away from Sophia's tear-streaked face, heart breaking at the weight her daughter had silently carried. "I just wanted you safe, Mama," Sophia whispered, voice shaking softly. "I was so scared, but I couldn't let him hurt you." The words settled deep into Ariana's chest, sharp with guilt, yet warm with gratitude. How had she missed it all? How had she let someone so dangerous step so close to the most precious thing in her world? Her throat tightened, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, mingling with Sophia's own. "I'm so sorry, baby," Ariana said, her voice cracking with remorse. I should have listened to you sooner." Sophia shook her head slightly, face pressed against Ariana's shoulder, murmuring quietly, "You're listening now. That's what matters." A gentle touch on her arm made Ariana turn slowly, meeting Michael's steady gaze. His expression was kind but serious, eyes calm yet deeply concerned. Ariana felt his silent strength anchoring her again, a quiet reassurance amid the wreckage of the day. "The officers need to speak with you," Michael said gently, careful not to alarm Sophia further. "They think Jean's involved in more than just this, something bigger, financial fraud. They need your statement." Ariana's breath faltered, a wave of cold realization washing over her. Was she just one victim among many? How many lives had Jean damaged, quietly destroying them behind the charm that had blinded her completely? She knelt once more, looking gently into Sophia's weary eyes, brushing a tender kiss across her daughter's forehead. "Go with Michael for now, honey. I need to take care of something important. I promise I'll be right back." Sophia nodded silently, reluctant but understanding, slowly releasing Ariana's hand to step closer to Michael's side. He placed a protective hand gently on the girl's shoulder, his gaze promising Ariana that Sophia would be safe, that he would guard her as fiercely as she herself would. Drawing a deep, shaking breath, Ariana turned away from the lingering devastation outside, stepping into the quiet stillness of the house. Every familiar surface felt changed somehow, foreign and strange, tainted by Jean's hidden darkness. But the study, Jean's private sanctuary, the one place he'd forbidden her entry, beckoned her now, promising the answers she'd desperately ignored. The heavy wooden door creaked softly as Ariana pushed it open, revealing a room she had never truly seen. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound books and neat stacks of papers. Jean's scent lingered faintly, clean, expensive cologne now sharp, suffocating, cloying in its familiarity. She moved slowly, fingers trembling as she slid open the first drawer of Jean's large oak desk. Her breath quickened, pulse thrumming painfully in her throat. Carefully organized files stared up at her, names she recognized vaguely from whispered conversations. Familiar, yet suddenly sinister. She kept searching methodically, drawer by drawer, heart racing faster with each movement. And then she found it, a folder carefully hidden beneath a stack of legal documents, simply labeled in stark black ink. A.B. Her initials, simple, yet terrifyingly impersonal. With a trembling breath, she slowly opened the folder, feeling as though she were tearing open an old wound. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, drowning out the oppressive silence of Jean's study. Inside lay a neatly stacked array of papers, each one meticulously arranged, deceptively innocent at first glance. But as Ariana began leafing slowly through them, her breath caught painfully in her throat. Her eyes widened in horror, disbelief giving way to a sickening clarity that chilled her to the bone. Transfer documents, each neatly forged with her name, flowed from one to the next. Property deeds, investment accounts, even life insurance policies, all quietly reassigned into Jean's name. Her signature, perfectly mimicked, gleamed back at her from every page, taunting her with its familiarity. The depth of the betrayal hit Ariana like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her chest. Jean hadn't just lied to her. He'd planned to strip her of everything she owned, quietly, efficiently, mercilessly. After the wedding, her entire life would have belonged solely to him. Ariana's legs weakened beneath her. She sank to the floor, the heavy weight of guilt and humiliation crashing over her. Her fingers tangled in her hair, head bowed low, trying to grasp how she'd allowed herself to become this vulnerable. She'd been blind, willingly blind, lost in a fantasy she'd constructed from loneliness and longing, and worst of all, she'd nearly dragged Sophia down into Jean's sinister web. Footsteps echoed softly behind her. Ariana lifted her head slowly, eyes blurry with tears, to see a police officer standing quietly in the doorway, his face calm, yet filled with cautious sympathy. He entered the room slowly, speaking in a low, respectful tone, careful not to startle her further. "Mrs.
Bennett," he said gently, "I see you found what we suspected would be here. I'm Officer Daniels. We've been tracking Gene Hackman for a long time. Years, actually. Financial fraud, forgery, organized scams.
But we never had solid proof until your daughter called us." Ariana nodded numbly, swallowing hard against the lump rising painfully in her throat. "Was I his only victim?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper, fragile and bruised. Officer Daniels hesitated briefly, his expression softening. "No, unfortunately there were others. But you were his main target, his biggest score." She closed her eyes tightly, humiliation twisting sharply in her chest. Her breath shuddered, fresh tears slipping silently down her cheeks. The full reality sank in with brutal clarity. She'd nearly lost everything. Not only her financial security, but far worse, Sophia's safety, their future together. A gentle silence settled between them, broken only by Ariana's quiet breaths. Then, clearly and vividly, Sophia's face rose unbidden in Ariana's mind. Brave, determined, refusing to let go even when Ariana herself had turned away. Her daughter had risked humiliation and heartbreak, had stood alone against an adult world determined not to listen, just to save her mother. Slowly, Ariana lifted her head, breathing deeply, resolve growing steadily within her chest. She carefully gathered the scattered documents, fingers tightening protectively around the evidence of Gene's deception. "I want to press charges," she said firmly, meeting Officer Daniels' steady gaze. "No deals, no compromises. He needs to pay, for everything." Officer Daniels nodded slowly, understanding evident in his quiet gaze. "We'll make sure of it, Mrs. Bennett. I promise you." Ariana rose slowly to her feet, legs steadier now, strength and clarity replacing the numbness she'd felt moments before. Carefully, she handed the thick folder over to the officer, releasing it along with the last remnants of her fear. Officer Daniels took it, holding it as if it weighed far more than mere paper. "We'll be in touch soon," he assured her quietly, stepping respectfully away. Left alone again, Ariana felt the oppressive heaviness of Gene's study pressing down upon her. The silence felt thick, suffocating, but also oddly cleansing. Every polished surface in the room, every piece of furniture, every small personal item Gene had carefully placed, now seemed tainted, false, hollow. Nightfall brought no relief. Ariana stood quietly, arms folded protectively over her chest, eyes trained firmly on the door through which the officers now led Gene back into the house. The room, once warm with promises, now felt cold and stark beneath the harsh glow of police lights flickering softly through the windows. The air tightened, as if the house itself was bracing for confrontation. Gene entered slowly, wrists cuffed, posture rigid with restrained fury. His appearance had shifted subtly, no longer polished and flawless but hardened, the charming mask completely shattered. His eyes, sharp and vicious, bore into Ariana's face. He remained silent for a long moment, a predator calculating the right moment to strike. Ariana's jaw tightened, but her gaze remained unflinching. Sophia stood quietly at her side, her small hand wrapped securely around Ariana's fingers. The child's breathing was calm now, steady, determined. Sophia had faced the truth long before Ariana herself had opened her eyes, and the courage Ariana now drew upon came largely from her daughter's quiet strength. Gene finally spoke, his voice dripping sarcasm, cold with contempt. "You could have had everything, Ariana. All you had to do was stay quiet, obedient. I was only taking what I deserved." Ariana stared at him, anger simmering beneath her steady gaze. Wordlessly, she tossed the thick folder onto the table in front of him. It landed heavily, papers sliding partly free, the forged signatures clearly visible beneath the harsh light.
"No, Jean," Ariana replied softly, her voice steady as steel, controlled and firm. "What you deserve is a prison cell." Jean's eyes flashed dangerously, his composure momentarily breaking into raw anger. He shifted his gaze slowly, deliberately toward Sophia, eyes narrowing in barely disguised threat. "If it hadn't been for the kid—" Before he could finish, Ariana stepped sharply forward, placing herself directly between him and her daughter, eyes blazing fiercely. The room stilled, every breath momentarily suspended. "That kid is the reason you failed," Ariana said coldly, voice hard and unwavering. "She's not my weakness, Jean. She's my strength." Jean's lip curled briefly into a sneer, fury radiating from his every muscle. But Ariana stood her ground, refusing to let fear weaken her resolve. The silence stretched until the police officers finally stepped forward again, gently pulling Jean back toward the door. As he was led out, Jean twisted around one last time, venom lacing his voice as he growled, "I'll be back, Ariana, and when I am, I'll bury you." Ariana met his hateful stare without flinching, her voice calm, steady, certain. "You've already lost, and I'll live every day proving it." The door closed firmly behind him, the tension in the room dissipating slowly, like steam after a storm. Ariana drew a deep, steadying breath, gently pulling Sophia closer to her side. The house grew quiet once more, but now it was peaceful rather than oppressive. Outside, the distant sound of Jean's police car faded into silence, signaling not just his departure, but the end of the shadow he'd cast over their lives. Morning sunlight crept softly into the house, painting the quiet rooms in gentle golden hues. Ariana sat beside Sophia, still wearing her wedding gown, now crumpled and stained, a symbol of lost illusions. She clutched the folder of documents, the stark reminder of betrayal, yet strangely no longer painful to hold. Sophia looked up at her, eyes clear, calm, the fear finally replaced by trust and love. Her voice was soft, cautious but hopeful. "Is it over now, Mama?" Ariana looked down tenderly, gently brushing hair from her daughter's eyes, voice quiet yet honest. "Not entirely, sweetheart, but he's finished." Sophia seemed to absorb this thoughtfully, nodding slightly. The shadow of fear that had lingered so long vanished from her young eyes, replaced by an understanding far beyond her years. The gentle creak of the front door announced Michael's arrival. He entered quietly, carrying steaming cups of coffee and hot chocolate, the faintest smile touching his lips. Michael didn't speak immediately. He never had to. His steady presence spoke volumes. He set the drinks down carefully, then settled comfortably beside Ariana, quietly offering her the reassurance of his friendship. His gaze was warm, free of judgment or blame. Ariana felt profoundly grateful for his quiet strength, for the trust he'd held on to even when she'd nearly lost herself. She glanced again at Sophia, who now sipped her chocolate quietly, eyes peaceful, content. Ariana felt something deep within her finally ease, an ache she'd carried far too long. The storm had shattered many things, but it had also swept away all illusion. She saw clearly now, the truth as stark as daylight. Ariana met Michael's eyes again, voice soft yet decisive. "It's time to start over." Michael's quiet smile deepened, eyes gentle, full of understanding. He nodded slowly, reassuringly. No further words were necessary. The three of them sat together quietly in the gentle morning sun, surrounded by the wreckage of a perfect fantasy, now replaced by something far stronger, reality, truth, and the bonds forged by courage and love. Ariana knew their life wouldn't be a fairy tale ending. But for the first time in years, she saw clearly the possibility of a genuine beginning. She leaned softly against Michael's comforting presence, her hand still resting protectively over Sophia's small, warm fingers. In that quiet space, amid the rubble left behind, Ariana felt peace gently bloom, slowly, tentatively, yet undeniably real. They had faced their darkest storm. Now, together, they would rebuild. Not perfect, not simple, but authentic, solid, and finally free. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.